This is an Audi RS3. Now, if you're thinking about buying one of these, do yourself a favour, watch this video because I'm going to cover all the common faults so that you can get a good car. Now, let's go. So the question is, what one do you buy? 2015 to 2017 gave us the first generation of these cars. 2017 onwards, right up to 2020, was the facelift. Amazingly, the major development in that facelift was to do with the engine. An all-new aluminium and magnesium construction meant you were saving 26 kilos, and a new turbocharger design meant that the power was right up to the magic 400. So yes, if the budget stretches, try and get one of the facelift cars. With the facelift, you're going to get some of the nice new mod cons as well. You're going to get sat-nav, connectivity for your smartphone and such, but be aware it's not all sunshine and roses. In 2018, this engine unfortunately got caught up in the new WLTP regulations, which meant the exhaust had to have an additional particulate filter added, and quite honestly, it killed a bit of the noise and also hampered the power a little bit. So on to what this channel is all about. What's the dirt on these cars? What do you need to look for when you're viewing an example, and what do you need to check? Well, first up, fuel pumps. There was an issue with particularly the earlier models of this car having faulty fuel pumps. Specifically, it was the one that's situated in the fuel tank itself, and when that issue occurred, Audi would generally tend to put it right. It required a new fuel pump and also the associated software update. Now, what do you need to look for when you're viewing a car? Well, watch it's not cutting out at idle, watch it's not running rough, and obviously double check there's no engine management light on. Now, before we close the bonnet or hood, depending on where you're watching from, have someone start the car up. Whether it's your friend you've taken along or the seller of the car, have them start it up and listen out for a distinct hissing noise coming from the engine. There's an infamous breather which can fail and it causes a hissing sound. So double check for that. Now, if you hear it, not the end of the world, but that's absolutely a great point to bring up with the seller. Save yourself a bit of money. Now, the last note on these engines, and don't get me wrong, this is not a problem, it's just something I want to make you aware of, is that they can be a little bit more tappety than most. The noise coming off them can be kind of clicky. Now, what that's mainly due to is the direct injection. The injectors do make a bit of noise, and also if you hear the car start from cold, particularly if there's been a downpipe or a decap fitted on it, the wastegate might be quite rattly for the first 30 seconds or so. Now, as I say, neither of these things indicate problems, but just be aware of them. So next up, let's... that was a bit much actually. Next up, let's get talking about the brakes, because there's a couple of things to be aware of there. Well, two problems specifically. Number one was the brakes could be a bit squealy on the early examples of the RS3. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but day in, day out, it's probably going to get on your nerves. The way that Audi rectified that was by fitting a couple of little dampening weights onto the caliper. What that done was got rid of the frequency where that squeal was coming from. Now, problem number two related to these front discs. You can probably notice here, if you've seen a set of standard discs before, these are aftermarket ones. The ones on the car that you're looking at might look slightly different, but the problem was these could be prone to warping, and that would cause judder through the steering wheel. Now, stay tuned on this buyer's guide because we're going to take this car out for a bit of a drive later on, and I can show you a few things to help identify that. As we move to the rear, visual check first, particularly if the car's got the standard exhaust on. The standard tips can be really prone to pitting and corrosion, and they can just end up looking a bit nasty. So have a look at them, make sure you can live with it. If you can't, then again, that's a good point to negotiate a bit of money off, get those tips off to a powder coater or the exhaust, and get them looking a bit cleaner. Make sure you bring that up with the seller. Now, the other thing to be aware of on this exhaust is you can tend to get a rattle from the standard system as well. Best way of identifying this, again, get your friend who's gone along with you to view the car, or even the seller, to start it up. Don't get gassed, but listen out for a rattle coming from either of the two tips. What this tends to be are the valves that sit just under this rear diffuser here, and you can confirm it is them by holding the end of a screwdriver to them. Right, so we're getting to that test drive, but first up, a quick favour to ask from you guys. If you're getting value from this video, please do hit the like button so that other prospective RS3 buyers can find it and get that same use from it, and also we make these buyer's guides for every type of car, so it might be a worthwhile subscribe for you as well. Anyway, let's get on with the faults that we need to check before we hit that test drive. Number one, before we get out on it, turn on the infotainment system, make sure the screen is up, and just have it doing something, whether that's sat-nav, radio, playing some tunes, it doesn't matter. Basically, we want to have it on because there's a known issue wherein it can just randomly reboot from time to time. Now, the owner of this car says it tends to happen more so when changing the drive modes, so you could potentially try that on your test drive as well. What I'm getting at here is leave the infotainment system on, so if it's going to reboot, you spot it on the test drive and not the drive home. So here we are, the moment you've been waiting for, out in that test drive, but what are we looking for? Well, first up, same as the S3s. We covered this in the S3 video that we filmed, and that is a clunking that comes from the rear. Now, it's to do with the rear bump stops. These were swapped out on the earlier cars for a later revision. So if you're hearing that, it's likely what it is. Now, next up, remember I mentioned when we were back at the garage, get a bit of heat into those brakes, do a few firm presses of them, and make sure that there's no vibration or judder coming through the steering wheel or the brake pedal. Of that steering, like 1 ton, lock to lock.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
Right, so next up what we're looking at is the Quattro system on these, which in fact isn't actually a true Quattro system in the sense of the word. Let me explain what I mean. So it's AUDI system, which basically means the car's driving the front wheels and passing power to the back when they begin to slip. Now the problem is, it is a serviceable item, and a lot of these either skip services or don't get done whatsoever, or some of them maybe get done wrong. Now I'm going to add a link in the description below to a DIY guide which we actually filmed, and it shows you how to service a AUDI if you're interested in doing it yourself. But how do we test for it? Why is it of interest on a test drive? Well, we can certainly test that, and the way to do it is get down to a lower speed, particularly if it's wet, and give the car a bit of stick. Now the traction on these is absolutely exceptional. Unless it's got horrible budget tyres on, this thing should just hook up and go. It shouldn't be spinning its front wheels, you shouldn't be getting traction lights, it should just go. Now if it is doing any of those things, then chances are that AUDI either needs serviced or the pump could have a problem, so be careful with that one. So how about how this car actually feels engine and gearbox wise? Well, honestly, it's as you would expect, super refined, just really nice to drive. Absolutely no groans, no noises, no hesitation in the gearbox, and hopefully the one that you're driving is the same. Don't be led to believe that any noises like that are normal. They're not. From this pristine example that we're driving, it's as smooth as can be. And there you go, you've now got all the tips that you need to go out there and find yourself a fantastic Audi RS3. Hang on though, don't click off of this video just yet. Let's see how it compares on our reliability leaderboard. So the Audi RS3, what do we make of it then? What is the score that it gets? Well, let's cut to the chase. It's an exceptionally reliable car, particularly when we consider the capabilities that it has. Yes, there may be a few things that you want to check when you're looking at a used example. That's why we make these videos. But for most of it, fairly trivial, and even some of it can be DIY done by yourself as well. And it's for that reason we give it a massive 9.5 out of 10, one of the highest scores we've seen on this channel. Now thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.